Do you know what sin is? Some people think of it as naughty behavior. It's more than that. In Genesis chapter 4, God warns Cain. He tells him sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you. Sin here is depicted as an opportunistic hunter with a taste for human flesh. And Cain had somehow invited it to his house. How did he do that? Well, the story of murder really begins as a story of worship. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of the flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and on his offering, he did not look with favor. Let's look at how each of these sacrifices is described. Let's look at their adjectives. Abel's sacrifice had fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. Cain's sacrifice, the adjective there is some. It doesn't speak of a lot of intention planning. Abel's sacrifice demonstrated love in that he gave the best, and it demonstrated faith in that he gave the first. Cain, his offering was much more haphazard. He was irreverent. And so Cain was at odds with God, and this caused him an intrapersonal conflict. And so this vertical conflict causes an intrapersonal conflict as we read on in Genesis chapter 4. It says, "So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. And then the Lord said to Cain, 'Why are you angry, and why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, won't you be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it.'" There's a principle, a force, a power in the universe that the Bible calls sin. And it could smell Cain's inner conflict, and it came near to eat. And so, reading on in Genesis chapter 4, verse 8, it says, "Now Cain said to his brother Abel, 'Let's go out into the field.' And while they were out in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him." He violated his very nature in that he attacked somebody he should love. He had become something less than human, something monstrous. He'd become the instrument of sin. Sin had consumed him and taken him. And so it changed. In consuming him, the result of that is that it changed his circumstances and his destiny and his identity. As we read on in Genesis 4:9, it says, "Then the Lord said to Cain, 'Where is your brother Abel?' 'I don't know,' he replied. 'Am I my brother's keeper?' The Lord said, 'What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries to me from the ground. Now you're under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. And when you work the ground, it will no longer yield crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain's attempt to solve the personal effects of his ungodliness, his irreverence, it destroyed everything. You know, people try to fix the bad feelings that they have, their inner conflict with relationships, but relationships are the things that suffer from that, and so they begin to be self-destructive. It's interesting that God's punishment for Cain's inability to get along with others is to send him out among others, people who are as violent as he is. And certainly that can't possibly solve everything. The gospel is the solution, though, to the problem of Cain. In 1 John 3:11-12, we're told, "This is the message that you have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. Do not be like Cain, who belonged to the evil one." We're supposed to love. That's what we're made to do. And yet we don't know what love is because we live out east of Eden. We live in the land of Nod. We live in a place where violence begets violence and fear dominates. We need the anti-Cain. What is the opposite of Cain? Well, you could probably guess. It's Jesus. And the gospel is the solution to this pollution in the world. 1 John 3:16, "This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. Cain took a life. Jesus gave a life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. Well, how do we do that? It's not that we die. It's that we if we have material possessions, he says, and we see our brother and sister in need, we should give it to them. It doesn't matter if we're going to use that later or maybe we had plans for it. That's giving up our life. He says, dear children, let us not love with words or in speech, but with action and in truth. This is how we know that we belong to the truth and how we set our hearts at rest in his presence. Cain was out of peace. His heart was not at rest in God's presence. And because of that, his whole life unraveled. Sin took hold of him. But Christians shouldn't be in such near proximity to sin. Sin doesn't belong on our doorstep. Why? Because our hearts are at rest in God's presence. Why is that? Well, because we love like he loves. We've become like the anti-Cain, who is Jesus. And so he says, if our hearts condemn us, we know that God is greater than our hearts, and he knows everything. Dear friends, if our hearts do not condemn us, we have confidence before God. We don't have to have our face downcast. We can look up and receive from him anything we ask because we keep his commands. We do keep his commands. They're simple. They are love. And we do what pleases him. Are you confident that you're doing what pleases him today? Are you living with your face upward in peace before God, peace within yourself, and consequently, peace with other people? That's the hope of the gospel. It's available to you. Please shoot us an email. We'd love to visit with you about this mighty message that changes things right now and for eternity.